You see that camera behind me, Mark? I
Yeah.
don't know if you got to see my lovely. She sits back
That
there.
was featured on Facebook, was it not?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
I'm obsessed with her. I actually got into bed one night holding the camera, and I was just playing around
Wow.
with, I wanted to play around with some of the features on it and stuff. And I'm coming into the bedroom, and my wife looks over and she's like, "Are you serious right now?" Okay.
Been replaced.
I'm going to leave the room, come back, and
Was-
start all over.
I was spooning with my camera.
Yeah. Have you posted anything yet? That
I
you've,
did.
messed
I did.
around with?
It should
I
be.
haven't seen that yet.
I've posted 2 videos that I cut at Cuyahoga Valley.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just like, and honestly, I'm learning new things almost every day. So as I'm playing around with it, I'm learning more. I mean, even tonight I was shooting like a little mini interview with myself, to put in the special features stuff. And darn it, what happened? I had a okay, I found it. And I found like all sorts of stuff I didn't know. So every time I pick it up, I'm learning something new.
Cool.
I'm really enjoying playing around with like the white balance settings and kind of changing the tone of the scene in camera. Like that stuff's really really
Yeah.
neat. Okay.
Well, when you start doing stop motion, let me know.
Oh my gosh, we need to talk this summer. I'm sorry, David. This is pretty typical for us. We need to talk this summer about doing some sort of like a stop motion movie or something, like a Harryhausen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a blast.
I'm all over it.
Okay. Our guest tonight is David Floyd, Dr. David Floyd, PhD of the. I just put down my phone and lost everything, so I'm going to start this over again. Where did we go here? This is brilliant. This is brilliant right now. See, this is why we avoid having guests, so I don't automatically botch the bio. David, what's the name of the school? I don't have it on my email for some reason.
Charleston Southern.
Charleston Southern. Okay.
Yes.
Our guest tonight is David Floyd. He's a professor at Charleston Southern University, assistant professor of English. And David is the author of Street Urchins, Degenerates, and Sociopaths, Orphans of Late Victorian and Edwardian Fiction, possibly one of the greatest names for any book ever.
It works very hard.
And has delivered papers on Gothic and medieval literature in the U.S., England, and Scotland. More recently, his research has focused on 19th century imperial discourse and the construction of identities, the development of 19th century psychological theory, changing perspectives of the family in Victorian culture and African history. And he informed me the other night that he is also working on a second PhD in cultural history, which sort of feeds more into his interest in monsters and Bigfoot. And you are one of the more distinguished guests we've had on the show. I'm almost intimidated. Like, I almost don't want to speak again the show and just let Mark handle the entire thing.
Oh, what?
My southern accent should level any of that.
And I'm glad you're bringing that up, like right off the bat, that the southern thing. I have to ask you, I spent a lot of time down south when I was a kid, and I still do today. And something that I don't understand, and I'd like you to tell me how you feel about it. Shrimp and grits.
Yes,
Do you enjoy that?
I do. I love grits, and I love shrimp. So yeah, those together. Is that a very southern thing? I don't know. It's real popular here in Charleston.
Right.
Now my wife, who is from Iowa, does not eat grits, so I guess it's a southern thing.
Okay. Mark, have you had shrimp and grits?
No, I've not had shrimp and grits. I've had grits and gravy.
Okay.
And I've had cheerwine.
Okay.
Once we get into like North Carolina, we'll stop
Pepsi
and start
and a
looking
moon
for
pie.
cheerwine. Yeah,
Is
my
that
son
what-
is big into cheerwine now.
Okay.
Since our
so-
last stop in the South.
I'm assuming this isn't. I mean, Andy's drinking it. I'm assuming it's non-alcoholic, unless something unless something goes horribly wrong the second you leave
it's
Ohio.
The rules are different here.
All right, what's the legal drinking age down south? Like 10?
9. It depends on what county you're in, I think. How far out you are.
You're probably not far off. Actually, a great deal of my father's side of the family is from North Carolina. So, and my parents owned a historical Civil War bookstore. So when I was growing up, we did book shows almost every weekend of my life, most of them in the southern United States. So I spent a lot of time in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee, and Georgia, and all over down there. So
that's a great story. That's cool.
Yeah, barbecue. I'm a big barbecue guy. And so anyway, I have to know, I'm going over your bio today. Mark sent me a text the other day that said that he thought your bio was just incredible, and I was thinking the same thing. But I have to know, because I'm not seeing a direct correlation between the things you are acquainted with and skilled in and like Bigfoot. So how does Bigfoot come into all of this?
Gotcha. So shall I just kind of say like sort of how I got into
Sure.
Bigfoot stuff?
Yeah, what got you into Bigfoot, and then I guess we'll go a little more broad and talk about how it plays into your field study.
I think it all comes together. So I think the first exposure I had to Bigfoot was watching SasWhat, The Legend of Bigfoot, in the theater when I was probably 8 years old. And I remember very clearly seeing the Patterson-Gimlin footage in the theater. That's really the only part of the film I remember. But I just remember how it kind of freaked me out as an 8-year-old, much in the same way that the Planet of the Apes movies freaked me out. But I was just certain that simians were going to take over the world. And how that's connected with Bigfoot, I'm not sure. But at any rate, I went on to be a fan of documentaries on cryptids, but Bigfoot type stuff especially. Watched In Search of course, and Monster Quest, and all these shows that we've all watched. Not really paranormal stuff. I'm not really into the ghost thing and all, but especially Bigfoot type stuff and all. And so I went on to major in English and become an English professor. And my area of specialization, and I mention this because it does circle around to Bigfoot eventually, but my area of specialization is genre fiction of the Victorian fin de siècle, which is imperial literature, Gothic literature, children's fiction, adventure fiction, and all of the late 19th century. And this is people like Robert Louis Stevenson, H.G. Wells, H. Rider Haggard, J.M. Barrie, all these writers that have written stuff that's very much with us today still. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Treasure Island, War of the Worlds, and stuff like that that's really still in our sort of popular consciousness. But at any rate, the Victorians have been kind of saddled with this stereotype of being really kind of uptight and sort of prudish. But man, did they write some strange stuff. And a lot of it has to do with monsters or some type of monstrosity and all that. So really my literary studies have always been kind of in that world of sort of the supernatural or the Gothic type of stuff. So it's not too much of a jump from the stuff I write about and read to sort of thinking about monsters in general, walking around in the woods or in the backyard. And also kind of growing up in coastal South Carolina, there's just lots of folklore and ghost stories and vestiges of the Civil War and all this. The past is really present here. But at any rate, when I completed my PhD, I sort of had this momentum going because I love to do research. I love to write and all that. And in fact, my kids make fun of me because if I ever have free time, I go to the library at the College of Charleston, which is downtown. It's a beautiful 3-story, magnificent place. And, you know, I'm the nerd that goes there on a Saturday when I could be playing outside, I guess. But anyway, I sort of had this momentum going, and I wanted to still work on something. You know, I wanted to write something, maybe another book or something, but I didn't want to reinvent the wheel and do something literary. So my research kind of took this historical turn, and even when I teach now, when I teach literature, I always do so kind of think about the cultural context of the work. You know, what's going on historically around that work, and what compels the author to write that in the first place. So, you know, if you've got somebody like Shakespeare writing in the 1500s during the Protestant Reformation, when you could be beheaded for being Catholic, he's got a certain set of issues that he wants to address. Whereas if you're talking about Stephen King writing in the 1980s about the disintegration of the American family, you know, these guys are writing on two very different registers. And that disparity interests me, you know, how cultures kind of represent themselves through their literary works and artworks and folklore and that type of thing. So at the same time, I remember the day I went to the library, and I thought, you know, I don't really know what I want to work on, but I don't want it to necessarily be literary, but I'm not really sure. And I found myself in front of all these books about medieval literature, and I started kind of flipping through them, and there were monsters all over the place. And so I started to sort of delve into researching sort of the perceptions of monstrosity and monsters and all through history and how that's changed, you know. So, you know, you can have something like the Frankenstein film that came out, the first one with Boris Karloff, you know, in like the 1930s or something, where the monster is something to be feared and destroyed. Whereas you have something like Hotel Transylvania that, you know, just came out in the last 5 years or so, where the monster is really celebrated, and that difference is valued, you know. And these are two very different ways of looking at monsters, and that so, you know, I sort of took that idea and started to apply it to this love of Bigfoot that I have, you know, and sort of see, like, you know, how has this being that's been around for a while been perceived in culture and all. So that sort of led to the two things that I'm working on right now. One is what seems to be becoming a book, like I said, the perceptions of monsters and the depiction of monstrosity and all, and how that's changed in Western culture. You know, I'll be talking at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference in May, and that talk is going to be largely about that, where you have like the hairy man and the wild man and the green man and Bigfoot and all these manifestations of the same type of creature throughout, you know, over 1,000 years of literary history or cultural history. And at the same time, I started this new PhD. It's really applicable to the studies of Bigfoot in that because my concern is folklore and legends and that kind of thing, and how cultures kind of articulate themselves through monsters and all. So that's all good. So I hope that all my interests can kind of dovetail in this new degree. What's really cool is I was emailing back and forth with my supervisor, my dissertation supervisor, and I was telling him that I was going to be going to Ohio and talking about Bigfoot and all. He did not know about Bigfoot, but I explained to him what it was. Nobody I've talked to, this is a school in Finland, by the way, so I'll be able to go to Finland a couple of times.
Wow.
But nobody in Finland had heard of Bigfoot that I've talked to. But he just happens to be working on research on like wild children, like feral children in the 19th century. So I can't wait to kind of talk face to face with him and see what he's, you know, he didn't even know that I was, you know, interested in Bigfoot and this kind of stuff, you know. So, so I believe that's the beginning of an interesting relationship there academically, you know, to kind of, you know, he and I both have written books on the 19th century, and now we both seem to have this interest in hairy creatures in the history. So anyway, does that sort of answer the question about how?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I gotta know though, right off the bat, what do you think of this phenomenon? What do you attribute it to? Do you think there's a real undiscovered primate roaming about? Do you have an opinion
It
one way or
seems
the
to me,
other?
I will quote Seth Breedlove, whose podcast I listen to frequently, who said that I don't know, but there seems to be enough evidence to recommend going to look for it. And if something is so consistent throughout at least Western culture, I'm sure probably Eastern culture as well, like the Yaren in China and all that. If something is that consistent, then there's a reason for it. If there were never any sightings and it was just this thing in folklore, then I would assume it was just that it had some kind of psychological impetus behind it or whatever. But you have reliable people like Kathy Strain who swears to seeing two of them run up a hill, and I think that there's a good number of credible witnesses that maintain that they have seen them, and unless all these people throughout history are colluding in some secret chat room, there seems to be cause to think that there's something to it. Does that sort of answer the question? But answer the question?
Yeah. And I'm sure Mark has a question, but before I let him speak, in all this research you've done on this folklore and the Middle Ages, all that kind of stuff, did you find anything that you directly automatically thought Bigfoot, or anything that you attributed to that kind of creature?
Yeah, there's the evidence of it from ancient Greece all the way up to where we are right now. In just about every culture that I've looked at, there's been some kind of a hairy something.
Yeah.
They, as I'll talk about in the talk in Ohio, they serve purposes. They have a cultural functionality, whether it's to in ancient Greece, where you've got this sort of seat of culture, and there's this sort of birthplace of logic and philosophy and all that, and everything's sort of structured and very coordinated. But then beyond that, you have the barbarian hordes that are threatening to come in and all, and these are always represented as hairy, barbaric beings. But beyond that, there's reports of still in ancient Greek and Roman texts of wild man or hairy men, not necessarily just not just the barbarians or whatever, but actually creatures,
Like what? I don't know that. I mean, Mark might be aware of that. I had no idea about Greek. I mean, as far back as I knew, it was like the Woodwos. So, did they have a specific name for this in Greek mythology?
I don't know. That I'd have to look up.
Okay.
But there's, you've got Greece and Rome, and then you have even, if you go past that to like patristic writers, there's this generation after Christ and the apostles, they talk, and whether or not it's based on a physical being or if it's just a theological thing of don't be like the wild man, it's still there. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly portrayed in art, from ancient Greece on. You can find sculptures and paintings and all from way back, of these hairy creatures and all. Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating to me, and to kind of sort of append something to your question a minute ago. What did I think about this phenomenon? I think I was pleasantly surprised at the range of issues in this phenomenon. It's not just a bunch of guys looking for a thing out in the woods. There's this whole subculture. There's sort of a language that that they have, and it's just stuff like do Bigfoot people think UFO people are a bunch of wackos, that kind of thing. And it's just there's a depth to it that I did not know was there, that I've been pleasantly surprised. There's there's the scientific angle that's probably the most obvious. We've got empirical evidence that suggests at least there's something there. But then you've got all these cultural implications behind it, and psychological implications behind it. And it's just about any discipline you can think of can be applied to this. And that's the really surprising and satisfying thing to me, is you can approach it from 5 or 6 different angles and yield fruit from it. And I think that's really an interesting thing.
Yeah. Mark, why don't you hop in?
Sure. David, you said that when you kind of ended up in front of the medieval section, there were all kinds of monsters that sort of sprang from the pages. In addition to the sort of Bigfoot-style creatures, what were some of the other monsters that really grabbed your attention out of the literature?
Can you hear me okay? That kind of jumped a little. Dragons, for sure. Serpent-type creatures tend to come along in that kind of literature. They had, in the medieval period, they had these what they called bestiaries, which are lists of fabulous creatures, whether they're real or not. And you've got the usual suspects like the or shown in these things, doing stuff like playing guitars and being mischievous. There's one of these primates standing around a barrel drinking beer, stuff like that. So yeah, there's all kinds of strange. The medieval period was really strange. But yeah, so there are lots of creatures. Whether any of them were real, I'm not sure. But they had a fanciful take on creatures, for sure, that everybody kind of knows about. Of course, is Grendel from Beowulf, which also features Grendel's mother, and then a dragon too. So.
In the bio that we have for the Bigfoot conference coming up here in Ohio, it also touches on the fact that you're working on a master's in criminology and in applying criminological theory to Bigfoot research. Can you kind of unpack that for us and see what some of the implications would be? Because that's fascinating sounding to me.
I started that program, and then I decided to go the second PhD route. But it's kind of cool because I took 3 or 4 classes in criminology, and many of them were based on criminological theory, which takes a look at stuff like where the victim was. There's stuff like routine activities theory, which looks at not just what the perpetrator was doing, what led to him being a thief or whatever, or a murderer or whatever, but also what is the victim, what does the victim do daily that puts him or her in this capacity to be murdered or robbed or whatever, and then what is the sort of the social context of all this that contributes to crime happening, And I thought, well, that wouldn't be kind of neat to take something like that and apply it to like a Bigfoot sighting, and I'm not really sure how specific I could get with that, other than it helps to be in the woods, maybe at night, and it's hard to, but I wonder, at least, and I don't know if I'm prepared to do it, but I wonder if there's enough theory in that kind of stuff where there's a predictability about stuff like where crime occurs and that type of thing. If you could apply that to the search for Bigfoot or something like that, and come to a way where you could at least come up with maybe an algorithm that says, okay, Bigfoot should be here at this time, So really, what I got out of that brief period was not only that, the idea of the sort of science of behavior that's really interesting to me, but also it helped me to understand scientific inquiry in a way that we don't do in the humanities. In an English class, you can have 25 students, and they all have 25 different opinions of the same story. And if they can prove it with textual evidence, then they're all right. Whereas if you're in more of a science class, like a criminal justice class or whatever, you can't just say, well, people from a certain area are all criminals. You need to have a study and prove it and that kind of thing. And that type of analysis is not something that I was used to doing, and it was a completely different side of my brain, which is why I wanted to take those classes in the first place. Because like I said, I'd sort of done the thing with literary. I tried that and took some of those classes, and I enjoyed them. But then when the opportunity for the cultural history thing came along, I thought, well, I could maybe throw Bigfoot into that too, and maybe have some fun with it. So,
well, and listening to you describe that, the thing that is very intriguing is it sort of describes two streams of what you might call Bigfoot studies, one being anecdotal evidence and folklore and, sort of a community tales that are told over time, and how those are regarded as, in a sense, as a shared truth. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have, the hardcore evidence folks. And sometimes those two things go together, and sometimes they don't. But they're held in tension as we kind of explore the topic. And
right.
You're always sort of ping-ponging back and forth between here's a track evidence and why we think that it is a legitimate foot and not a fake. And then you go back to somebody's account of something that happened to them or someone they know, and you find yourself in the middle of that all the time.
And that's what's cool to me about that is, it's not to disparage any of the sciences and all, but rather than just studying how fish move in the water or something like that, you're not going to have anecdotal evidence it's sort of a nice mixture between scientific inquiry and storytelling, and sort of detecting the truth within those two is I guess what we're trying to do. And I love that, the multifacetedness of it, if that's a word. I'm an English major, so I can make it work. Just the different aspects of it, I think, like I said, is what was really pleasantly surprising to me. Once I'd watched these documentaries and stuff forever, but as far as it's only been in the last couple of months that I really sat down and started reading books about it and trying to write about it, and put together a presentation for it and stuff. And I think of aspects to it. It's fun. It's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get into talking about some of the reports from your area, because you're in South Carolina, and you were messaging me back and forth on Facebook that you had found some sightings in that area. And this is actually an area that Mark and I think we talked at least a couple times about doing a show specifically about South Carolina, didn't we? Or that whole area. Yeah, that
definitely.
region. Mm-hmm. And hadn't quite got to it yet. So this will kind of be our opportunity to broach that southern coastal kind of Bigfoot. So let's get into a little bit of that. And then I know Mark is absolutely dying to talk Lizard Man with you.
Lizard Man.
So, start us off. What do you got? What do you got down there?
Okay, so I have one from Charleston County, 3 from Horry County, and 3 from Berkeley County. And we don't have to do them all, but there's a few that I definitely want to do. I don't know. But the first one, and the reason I think I told you, the reason I chose these particular counties is because I've lived there or do live there, and these are all kind of familiar places to me. So just for selfish reasons, I chose these counties. Although I have to give a shout out to my wife, who was talking to me this morning, and she was like, "Did you look in Dorchester County?" And I was like, "Well, no, not really." And she was like, she dropped the word squatchy on me this morning. She said, "Well, those are really squatchy places." I was like, "I love you even more now." So I thought that was cool. But
Yeah.
at any rate, so this one from Charleston County. This is from June of 1970. The nearest town to this is Somerville, which is where my in-laws live. Now, Somerville is kind of a big, small town now. I think Tom Cruise and Oprah have houses in Somerville, of all places.
Wow.
I could be wrong about that, but I think that's right. But anyway, rural Somerville is very rural. It's nothing but woods and all. And like I said, my in-laws live out there, on like 5 or 6 acres. And every time we go out there, I expect to see something walk across the road. But anyway, this is interesting. The witness edited the nearest road to the sighting was edited per request of the witness. It's one of those cases where they did not evidently want a bunch of yahoos walking around with flashlights at night looking for stuff on their land. But anyway, she says, I'm 47 years old, and I can still remember what I saw and smelled just like it was yesterday. I can also remember the fear. That's like the beginning of a great short story. It's so great.
That's like Boggy Creek or something.
I love it. I remember what I saw and smelled.
Yeah.
So the kid, she and some of the other kids were playing outside. She said, I began to notice an awful smell, like something dead, a real overpowering smell. The place where I lived had a chain link fence around the property, which was about 1 to 2 acres. We were on the back side of the property, which had woods behind it. You could see red eyes glowing in the dark, but I could not say how tall it was. I do know that it was taller than a human being. It just stood there and watched us. She said it was seen on many occasions, and we could always smell it before we saw it. I love that. And here's where it takes a kind of creepy turn, as though that's not sufficient enough. She said there were several neighborhood dogs at the time that were found with their skulls crushed, but no one knew who or what had killed them. And of course, this makes me think of Minerva Monster or Momo or one of those guys that kills dogs or walks around with them. And then she goes on to say one night she and a friend decided to stay in a trailer at the back of the property, which seems perfectly logical at this point. And she talks about something begins to beat on the side of the trailer. Whatever this thing was, walked around the trailer and hit on it and tried to get in. We could see its shadow every time it came around. That's a great image. It was the longest night of my life. It continued just until daytime. Another night, we were awakened by a loud thud on the side of the house. My brother came out screaming because it was at his window. And there's a later account of the same creature evidently down the street looking in a young girl's window too. And she says it got to where we quit playing outside because the kids were scared. And then finally, the final time she sees it, just has these great little details in it. She said, I did see it one time after that. It was probably October of that same year. I had gone out to the pump house and turn the light off the well because we kept it on the pump at night to keep the water from freezing. And it's those little details about sort of this bucolic life, that are so genuine to me and that make these things seem believable, that she throws in that little detail of this is why the light was on. I love that kind of stuff. And she says, I saw in the early morning sunshine this creature that looked like an ape standing at the other side of the fence watching me. It was tall, had dark brown hair, and it had a sloping forehead that looked like some kind of ape. I could not see the eyes because they were hooded, which I assume means he has a low brow or he's rocking the hoodie. It was standing there, just kind of rocking side to side. I can still see it as plain as day in my mind right now as I write this. I think that is a great account. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Whoever wrote that, I guess she wrote that. I mean, that's beautiful writing, actually.
Yeah, the details are great, and it's not as grammatically challenged as some of these other accounts that I run into.
Right. Right.
So,
what year was this?
1970. So this would have been 3 years after
They all had that. They all did the same. These Bigfoots there was some sort of trend going on with Bigfoots during the 70s where they were like mercilessly murdering dogs, and then they all had the hooded kind of, because that's the same description Minerva Monster has, or Momo.
Is that right?
Where you can't make out the eyes exactly. I mean, at night, the Catons could see the eyes of Minerva Monster glow, is what they said. But otherwise, you couldn't make it out because the kind of hooded look. I mean, that's like cool. You said, I mean, unless they were all wearing hoodies, which is possible too, I guess. I don't know.
Who knows what
Who am I to know?
Taste are.
Yeah.
Okay, so these other three are from Horry County, which is Horry. Usually improperly pronounced Horry, which is...
It's rude.
There could be some areas that are Horry, but it's pronounced Horry. But anyway, I was just waiting for an opportunity to use that joke.
You saw, as soon as you saw that you had sightings from there, you're like, oh man, I'm going to get to use my Horry joke.
So this first one is... from April 2007, so this is fairly recent, and this is on near Little River, which is on the border of North and South Carolina, and the Highway 17 that runs through this is usually really heavily populated, or traveled rather, but there's some places there where it's just nothing but road, and if you veer off, you go down, into the swamp kind of thing. Another sort of interesting thing about Little River, and I used to go through there a lot to Ocean Isle in North Carolina, and but the cool thing about Little River 20 years ago was that was where people would go get tattoos. If you lived in South Carolina, you couldn't get a tattoo, so Little River was the place to go.
Why couldn't you there were no tattoo parlors?
I think that there was a law against getting a tattoo in South Carolina. But I'll have to see about that, but I think that's the case. But you could go to, I think it was called like Borderline Tattoo Parlor, because it was literally like 50 feet from the border of the States. So that's where you go to do that. But anyway. All right, so
that's great.
It's awesome. All right, so this guy says, about 2 weeks ago, I was walking on Highway 17 at about 9 p.m. to the nearest store. Already credible, right? I heard a scattering in the bush. I figured it was a deer or even a wild hog, and I always love when people say what they think.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, but I heard an even louder scatter in the bushes, 10 to 20 feet in the woods. I panicked and quickly ran back closer to the edge of the highway. I was too afraid to run, so I walked quickly.
Do we just freeze? What happened? Hold on.
Look to see what was following me, and it stopped too, so it seemed to be like paralleling him, I guess. As I approached an area that was partially lit by a company that had an outside light on, I could see at the edge of the woods a creature that appeared to be squatting down with its long arms in front of it. The hair looked to be maybe 5 inches long and a light reddish color. Now this is an interesting thing about the Horry County accounts, because they all are very similar. They all have this kind of orangutan thing of long arms and this kind of orangey hair, and typically this kind of shock of hair at the top like they have, And he says, I believe it might have been a skunk ape, which I thought was, I didn't know everybody knew that term. And then an odd footnote about this sighting in the follow-up to the investigation. The witness had a comment concerning that he had a feeling the bipedal was lonely and felt the creature may have been trying to toy with him as he was walking along to the store. So,
wow,
it's just a lonely orangutan looking for a friend.
I mean, either that or he was trying to find the tattoo parlor. It's one or the other.
He got lost.
Maybe.
He got lost. He was following the creek, and I
thought the border was this way. But, David, the thing that I really like about the beginning of that report is sort of the irrationality of the response, where he says, I was too afraid to run, so I walked quickly. I mean, as strange as that sounds, it also rings true. In the moment,
Right.
when you're terrified, you don't do rational things. You do things that freak yourself out sometimes.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And it
So
seems like,
I got to know though, David, like when you're kind of looking at these reports, do you notice things like that? I mean, with your analytical mind and the criminology background, I mean, things like that have to spring out at you, right? Like,
absolutely. That's the thing I love about. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That's the thing I love about these is there's such a genuineness about them, and the very last one I'm gonna read to you is so classic in this regard. Just they don't try to clean it up. They just write it like they would have spoken it,
Mm-hmm.
And there's just this kind of raw emotion in some of it, to where they're not trying to be articulate necessarily. Now the one lady with the chain link fence and all that, talking about the smell and all that stuff. There was some kind of cool lines in that, but a lot of these, it's just really emotional writing. And yeah, that does kind of jump out at me. I think that's cool. All right, so another one. Is it okay if I'm just kind of jamming through these? Okay.
I'm just kind of sitting back.
I didn't mean for this to turn into the David Hour, but
that's what it is.
So this one is along the Little PD River. Okay, this is a name that I'm used to saying because I went to PD Academy between Marion and Mullins, South Carolina. And people always laugh at that. My kids think that PD is funny, but it's actually an old Indian name. But at any rate, this how's it spelled, or is it just PD? Peeddee.
Okay.
So it looks as ridiculous as it sounds.
Wow.
You just can't get around it.
That's on signage and everything. When you go down that direction, that's everywhere.
Yeah,
PD.
but if you get around it by saying, "Oh, I went to PDA, PD Academy," but at any rate, this sighting is cool because it's along the Little PD River, as opposed to the Big PD River. There's a big one too, and this is between Marion and Mullins. And Marion and Mullins are sort of these Mayberry type towns in South Carolina, maybe 15 minutes from each other, kind of like the Twin Cities of Horry County, or Marion County. But anyway, Marion it stands out to me because I lived there for about 15 years. And so it's one of those towns where nobody knows where it is, but everybody goes through it on the way to Myrtle Beach. So if you say, "Oh, I live near Myrtle Beach," oh, okay. Anyway, this person says, as I was traveling along one of the many shortcuts I had found, I'm sorry, this is from 1998, and near Mullins. As I was traveling along one of the many shortcuts I had just passed the Little PD River. I noticed there was a dog, what I thought was a dog, in a ditch. As I approached, the animal turned and looked at the car, and I immediately knew that this was no dog. It was stooped over the ditch, maybe eating a deer carcass or some other roadkill. I don't know why they assumed that. I thought that was cool. When it turned, there were a couple of things I noticed first. Its face almost looked like an orangutan. There was no fur on the face, and it had lips with no real shape to them. The mouth was wider than a man's. Lips were pursed together and very narrow. Its head seemed wider than normal, with scraggly fur on top. Its fur had an orange-brown tint to it. And again, that whole orangutan kind of look. I did not get a chance to look at it in full length. And what it is the thing is standing in a ditch, evidently eating on the side of the ditch, like a roadkill buffet, sort of. The chest was much larger than the midsection. The arms were very long. There's again the long arms, and what appeared to be fingers were curled up in its palms, therefore making me believe it was some sort of ape that maybe walked on all fours like a chimpanzee. It was covered from head to toe with this orange-brown fur. So again, that's another case where you have a really consistent, and this is 9 years or so before the previous one, But that sort of orangey type color and the long arms and all, that to me that kind of consistency, is something to consider. Another one is back from 1974. This is near Myrtle Beach.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah, sure.
That area where you were just talking about, well, and I guess this one too, if they're both kind of in that Myrtle Beach area.
Yeah.
How much has that landscape changed in 30 some odd years, 40 years? I mean, is there development, expansive development? Is it slower to develop there?
Only, within, nearer the beach, there's lots of little developments and stuff, but there's still a lot of woodland and swamp and all that back there. I was going somewhere else with that, but I lost it. But yeah, it's fun. Like as far as the landscape, it has developed quite a bit. But unfortunately, that sort of central Myrtle Beach has developed or degraded in some sense. Because when I was younger, I would just drive there and wander around, and with no fear, But my children actually call it Murder Beach now because it's sort of a scary place to go.
Yeah.
It can be, and Myrtle Beach is kind of southern and northern ends are still sort of places you could take your family and hang out, So this other account is from April 1974 in Myrtle Beach. There used to be an Air Force base there. Since it's closed down, but there was a security officer at the Air Force Base. He says, I was patrolling on a security road called the Serpentine about 9 p.m. That just sounds cool. I saw this creature mid-stride just as it was about to leap over a ditch by the roadside. It made the jump in about 3 seconds. The creature had light brown fur covering its body. In the follow-up investigation, he mentions that it has sort of a sandy brown coloration, so it's still kind of consistent with that orangey type of color we've seen. He says, as I had been trained to report situations of any creature, of any nature, as correctly as possible, I believe that the following information is fairly correct. The creature stood about 7 to 8 feet tall and probably weighed about 400 to 450 pounds. For its size and obvious weight, it had remarkable agility and speed. The jump it made cleared 14 to 16 feet with no problem. It had a large body like a human covered with fur. And again, one thing that is cool about this is, we've got someone that's trained to notice details. And so that's cool. Another thing is that he says later that he contacted his supervisor and told him about it, and the supervisor was like, for the sake of your career, you don't want to talk about this, And so I thought that was kind of interesting. So he kind of had to keep it under his hat.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I am really curious about that development thing, especially in South Carolina, because I noticed when I went to Hilton Head a few years ago that it seemed like there was way more development than I remembered from when I was kind of a kid, I guess, and had been down in that area. And it seems like those little coastal towns just expand outward.
Yeah.
And it just, a lot of that forest is getting overrun, I guess, with homes.
There are places like, Hilton Head has really strict restrictions about what you can do and what color your signs can be and that kind of thing. Whereas, sort of Myrtle Beach is kind of like anything goes.
Right.
And they haven't sort of maintained that kind of bucolic nature that had 50 years ago or so.
Right, right.
But I feel like I'm in Myrtle Beach. I grew up in and around there, and I love it, but it's not the same place it was when I grew up. Yeah. I'm sorry, Mark.
Oh, no. Well, just, and having said that, though, I mean, once you get away from the coast, it spreads out pretty quickly as far as available land and lots of it, because having just stopped in Bishopville recently, part of that is you're driving over the swamp.
Right.
And at first you think, okay, we're going to drive over the swamp for a little bit, but then you just keep going and going, and it continually, acres upon acres of swampland, so
And
there's plenty of it still to this day as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. I think we don't. We go to somewhere like Myrtle Beach or one of these kind of resort areas, and you kind of hang out where there's a McDonald's and a Papa John's and all these buildings that people stay in and all that, and it seems like it's all cluttered, and it sort of is, but then 5 minutes down the road, it's this expansive nature. When I was in college, I worked for the agricultural department for 2 summers, and we would go out, and our job was to look for this thing called witchweed, which is this little red flower that evidently stunts the growth of corn. And so our job was to go look for this flower in cornfields and all. It was not a hard job. It was a good way to earn money. But we were given, the cool thing about this is we were given these big aerial photos of the areas. And Mark, just like you were saying, you'd have this little town, and these were taken from airplanes, and so you'd have miles and miles and miles. And these maps were like 3 or 4 feet long, and you'd have there's so much woods and swamp and all. And it was really kind of cool to see exactly what you were saying. You've got these real not dense, but lots of people in one little area, but then acres and acres and acres of swamp, that can't be built on, maybe a road through it, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's such an interesting state anyway, terrain-wise, and just the way it's laid out. There are parts of it that are, obviously a little more like North Carolina, where you get into the mountains and stuff like that. But it's also just, it's whenever I go there, I am automatically in this mindset that it's like pirate times, and like Blackbeard's hiding in a cove somewhere. And that's just like the mindset. There's this atmosphere to South Carolina that I adore.
Yeah.
It's probably one of my favorite places in America.
I love living here. It's fun. It's cool. There's there's as far as being outside, you could go to the beach, or you can go west and find a mountain. There's all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. The one drawback is probably the humidity and the mosquitoes. Those are kind of rough, but other than that, it's awesome.
I think that's why that southern Bigfoot is so nasty. They say he's really angry. I think it's probably the heat and the mosquitoes. He's just running around swatting.
A hairy animal.
Yeah, sweaty, hairy animal.
Yeah, that's why they're
mad at the world.
What did I do to deserve this?
Too, evidently.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
That's something to talk about, though. I haven't seen many reports from down there of multiple creatures. It's typically a lone creature road crossing kind of thing. Whereas in reports, not all the time, but you get these like Minerva Monster and reports like that where you're hearing accounts of multiple creatures. These classic southern Bigfoot reports, it's always just one, right?
Yeah, and I was surprised to see how many there were at all, because you never hear about that around here. It's not like in Washington State or Ohio where they're seen all the time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess it's too hot, so they don't come down here.
Avoid it.
So the other 3 are from Berkeley County, which is the county where I live. And this is from October 2004 from Cordsville, which I'd never heard of. I had to look up to see where it was. It's actually about 27 miles from where I'm sitting right now. And this is a case where they just saw a creature running across on all fours. And let's see where. He said, I believed it to be a Bigfoot on all fours. And it says later in the follow-up, several witnesses have described seeing Sasquatches running briefly on all fours before standing erect and continuing on 2 legs. These observations usually involve younger ones, but not always. Curiously, they most often happen in the context of a road crossing sighting. I don't know. I've never thought of Bigfoot kind of going on all fours through the woods, but I don't know. Maybe the road hurts his feet or something.
There aren't many reports of it, but they're out there.
Yeah.
I always think it's interesting. It I don't know. Mark, the all fours thing. I feel like this is something at some point we should talk about on the show.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
when,
and I also think, for whatever reason, lately I've heard more of that just over the last couple of years than in many years combined before that. It just, the behavior is either being observed more, or I don't know what other alternative there would be to that. But yeah, that there's a show in that for sure.
I have nothing to contribute about that. I'm an English guy. I don't know. So this other one is there's just another one. I won't read this one, but it's just somebody saw a creature going across the road from left to right in one leap. I picked this one out just because it actually happened about 5 miles from my house. There's what's called the Francis Marion National Forest about 6 miles up the road from where I am now, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes for hours until you get to Marion. And so there's lots of it's like a preserve or whatever. So, but one of the funny things about it, the guy said, at first I thought it was a hunter. And then I thought it might be a weird person following me or something. I started getting a little worried, and I thought of turning back towards my car. I knew it wasn't a deer because it was on 2 legs and it leapt across the trail. It was definitely human, though, and I was a little spooked. The fitting thing about this is that the witness now lives in Florida near the Mayaca State Park. So
nice.
I thought that was cool. That was worth finding.
Big mistake, though, moving to Mayaca if they were scared of the other one. I mean,
they're mean down there, too.
yeah.
That picture, he's looking really upset.
Yeah. I did. Most of these are not all of them, but a lot of these seem to be roadside or near a road, which kind of makes sense because of the place, I guess. Because of South Carolina.
This one is not near a road.
Okay.
And this one is the best one of them all. I saved it for last because it's so good for so many reasons. This is from July 1993. This is in Dorchester County, which is, according to my wife, is squatchy. This is near Pineville. I'm not exactly sure where that is. But it's evidently near Dorchester County, but it's in Berkeley County, which is my county. But anyway. This starts, first of all, I don't believe in Sasquatch.
Uh-oh.
Second is spelled the number 2 and then NT, which is awesome. My granddad used to tell, isn't that awesome? My granddad used to tell us stories of a bear or something that looked like, or tell us stories of a bear or something that looked like one. My grandma would tell him to stop because it would scare me so. So right there, you've got this great kind of backstory of folklore and all this. That's excellent. So this group goes to the secluded area to camp, evidently where the granddad had said there's a bear or something. He says the Santee Lake and around it is swampy, and the lake is full of stumps, a lot of moss and in the trees. It's a very beautiful place to go, but not. When the water comes out of the dam, I don't know what this means. When the water comes out of the dam, it is spit into by an island. I don't know what that means.
Probably split, maybe split in 2.
Maybe so. Yeah, that makes more sense. I feel like I'm
Just
grading
slightly.
a freshman paper here. I have never been on that island. It is very swampy and full of snakes. My uncle still hunts on it, though. As a matter of fact, that's why I'm telling you this. He's the only one who didn't laugh at me. You name it, it's on the island. Snakes, wild hogs, deer, lots of deer. Many say they seen bear and gators. I'm now saying there's something that walks on 2 legs and is not a bear. I love that. It's a wonderfully ominous sentence. You know I'm not going to make a big story out of this. I'm just going to tell you what happened, which is a great disclaimer. So they're sitting around and they hear something throwing things into the water nearby. And he would take his light and shine it down the river, and when he did that, the noise would stop. But if he took his light away, they would start throwing stuff on in the water. So everything is fine for about 30 minutes. Then, deer were jumping into that river like crazy. I have to admit I was getting a little nervous. He said, then it happened. Something was coming up that cliff, and it was breaking branches, and you could hear dirt falling around from the weight of it. There's no way a deer can climb that bank. It was getting closer and closer, and I don't know what this says, what it means either. It didn't take but one what out of her to get me in my truck looking for my gun. Couldn't find it, and I was yelling at her, asking, where's my gun? She didn't know. So they jump into the car to leave. And then there's this neat detail. He says, that he didn't want to leave because he grew up there, and this was his place, and he felt like it had been intruded on by this creature, so he wanted to find. And he says, God is my witness, and her. This was no bear. The thing was maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, and big, hairy, and wet. It didn't stand straight like you and me, but it had more of a slump from the waist up. It had the reddest eyes, not looking, moving at all, just standing there. Oh my God, my granddad was telling the truth after all. Which is this awesome affirmation of this whole folklore, that his grandmother was like, don't tell the kids, and it's like this moment, where he realizes his granddad was not telling the truth.
Yeah.
He says, the next day we saw these footprints that were bigger than mine. I saw the cliff and all the broken branches and the dirt that was dug out from it. And he talks later about, we smelt an awful smell, and I just point this out because this is a neat detail. We smelled an awful smell, like dead fish or an animal. It could have been just a change in the wind from the river. And what he's referring to there is there's a saying that South Carolina has its own smell. And if the wind's coming from the south, then it's the low tide. But if it's coming from the north, then it's the paper mill in Georgetown. But either way, South Carolina has its own distinct flavor. Drops. Fish get stuck in the pools and on the rocks. The water dries out and the fish die and stink, which I thought was just this great little detail, But that is my personal favorite of all these, just because the realization that this story that his grandfather had told him was evidently true.
Yeah.
And just the begs to be read. It's awesome.
Your eye for these little storytelling ticks is fantastic. That's what I love about sighting reports too. It's what always draws me to specific ones over others.
Right. Yeah, I would prefer them sort of speak in their dialect or write in their dialect than try to be necessarily scientific or articulate about it.
Right.
It makes it a lot more fun to read. I love it.
Right.
That might be kind of a segue to a question I really want to ask you, David,
Okay.
at this point, which is, you had mentioned early on that Bigfoot serves, or Sasquatch, or the hairy man, serves as a, it says something about our culture. And I guess the question I want to ask you is, in your opinion, what function does Bigfoot serve in our culture today?
Well, Ivan Sanderson had 3 different reasons for Bigfoot and stuff like that. One of them was he called the bugbear. It serves the purpose of teaching a moral story. It's like the don't go out in the woods or Bigfoot's going to eat you. Stay in the yard or you'll get in trouble, kind of thing. And so there's this sort of moral element to it. It's the scary thing that's going to happen to you if you misbehave. Another one was the what he called the grooming hypothesis, where he talks about how primates will pick bugs off of each other and kind of groom each other, and that creates a society among them because they have this shared need for each other. And he said that often these stories, like stuff about Bigfoot and all, pulls everybody together. That a common belief creates solidarity. So there's another one, and what's the third one? There's a third one that escapes me right now. if I think of it, I'll come back to it. But
Okay.
So that's what Ivan Sanderson said. But for me, again, if it was just a bunch of stories, it would be like, oh, that's a charming, interesting story about a monster, But to take that and add it to scientific evidence that we have, empirical evidence, and then take that and add it to witnesses that, at least the credible ones, and there's a bigger picture there, and that you have, these sort of cultural stories that serve a function of either scaring children into submission or just being some kind of, mirrored psychological kind of thing, mirroring the darker self or whatever, and all these kind of abstract, maybe cultural functions that it might play. But then, it's that idea is sort of complicated by having evidence that it's an actual creature, and so it's not as simple as what a neat story. It's based on this actual thing that's standing outside the fence watching you, I don't know if I answered the question or not, but
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about this lizard guy. I believe his name is the Lizard Guy, out of Bishopville, South Carolina. And this is Mark just got back from a trip down there, which we talked about. Andy was drinking beer or something. And Mark,
For the record, cheer wine is a soft drink.
it is.
So
It's a
please don't
carbonated-
write in taking
Yeah.
me to task.
I do want to know I've heard cheer wine. Is it? It's. I
Yeah.
mean, and I grew up traveling down there, and for some reason, I don't know what cheer. It's like just a soft drink. It's like a beverage.
It's a
Yeah.
carbonated, like
Carbonated. Okay.
dairy flavored type of drink.
Okay.
Have you ever had Faygo Rock and
Yes. Yes.
Rye? It's somewhat like that.
Is it like Ale 8? I mean, is it like just a really strong ginger ale? No?
Well, but it's more of a berry
Okay.
flavor,
Oh, I wouldn't like it then.
cherry
anyway.
berry.
Okay.
Often
yeah.
mixed with other things, from what I understand.
That explains a lot. All right, so Mark, I'm going to let you take this segment while we talk about lizard guy.
Lizard Guy? Well, again, I would say that the thing that strikes me about Bishopville is how ordinary it is. Once you pull off of the expressway, it in many ways is the epitome of small town South Carolina. And there are just a few touchstones that show how they have embraced the Lizard Man as a tourist attraction, I suppose, even to the point where it's included in the Cotton Museum that's there in Bishopville. And there's a corner of the museum that's devoted to tracks and T-shirts and little stuffed lizards. And they certainly have seized on it as a way of attracting attention to the larger culture, because it's not the Lizard Man Museum, it's the Cotton Museum. So
Right.
they've wisely co-opted that as a way of expanding the knowledge of the larger culture of the state.
Just today, when I got home, I turned on the television and I was watching the Monsters and Mysteries in America, and there was an episode about the Reptile Man of South Carolina, which I had never heard it called the Reptile Man. I guess Lizard Man was not as sexy. I don't know. But the funny thing, I've got 4 or 5 articles here from 1988, and there's just a couple of things about I'm sure you guys probably know more about this than I do, and certainly somebody like Lyle Blackburn, offered a lot more than I ever could. But just some stuff that jumped out at me about this that I thought was awesome. One is the article from September 1890, July 18th, 1988, calls it South Carolina Swamp Slob. I've never heard, and I haven't
That's
read
awesome.
Lyle's book, so I'm sure this is stuff you already know. But so I thought that was awesome. I grew up, an hour or so from this place, maybe not even an hour, you know. And so I remember when all this happened, and I remember just thinking, oh, this, and it was, you know, a hot topic, you know. But a couple of things that I found, just little idiosyncratic things, and you might know this already, but Scape Ore Swamp was once called Escaped Whore Swamp.
Yeah.
Did we? Okay. So
are we in? How far are we from Horry County? From there.
From Horry County. Let's see. Marion is in Marion County. It's adjacent, I believe, to Horry County.
Okay.
Hour-ish, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so when you saw Escape Horse Swamp, did that kind of, you got excited though to bring up the Horry joke again? That we
Oh, you know, I didn't even make that connection. But isn't there I'm so disappointed in myself that I didn't think of a joke before I got on here for that. Can we edit that out? That I can come up
we'll figure something out. We'll do some, like, what do they call that when you go back afterward? Is that the AV or whatever when you're doing a movie edit? You know, and you re-record audio afterward. We'll do that. After we shut down and close down the live broadcast, we'll record like a whole bunch of hilarious stuff. I'm going to cut out everything that I'm saying right now. It's going to be like 20 minutes of us, and there'll be like a laugh track, and it's going to be great.
So the Escape Tour was awesome. Let's see, what else? Talk about swamps. Articles talks about, one of the deputies says, looks like we got a Bigfoot on our hands. Which I thought was cool because like the default term is Bigfoot, even if it's a reptile with 3 toes. You know, there's another one that says, one of the officers says, I don't believe it's a lizard man. I think it's just a Bigfoot. And so that you know, that's sufficient to explain what's going on.
Right, of course.
And that's not anything to worry about. A lizard man might be a problem, but
Right.
as long as he's not one of those grumpy ones from Horry County.
All right.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Lizard Man is strange. It's the book by Lyle Blackburn I would highly recommend. And we've talked about, I feel like we talk about Lizard Man like every episode anymore. But
I'm contractually obligated to mention Lizard Man.
He will not go away. Yeah. Oh yeah, and I sent you guys that article today.
Yeah.
That I had forgotten about that. I've got a subscription to College of Charleston magazine just because I'm an alumni from there. The guy that went there, Westerfeld House, I think is his name. And I know him. He wouldn't know who I was if I ran up and hit him in the face. But I remember getting that issue. I think it was maybe 4. Decided to try to look it up today to see if I could pull up an internet version of it, and actually ended up finding it, and then the little video that went along with it that I sent to you guys. So I thought that was a neat story.
Yeah,
because it really painted a picture. One of the cool things about that article, you know, of all these interesting people.
All right, we're going to have to start to wrap up here. So, David, why don't we have you tell us what you have coming up? I know you said you might be working on a book. Is there anything definitive in the works in that direction?
Just a bunch of notes at this point. The majority of my research lately has been more PhD and cultural history oriented, with the Victorian period and all, and I'm sort of pulling sort of this treatment of monsters and all, and it started out as this, you know, it's gonna book with the background of a consideration of how monsters received and all that. Making the presentation that's going to be in Ohio, that will give me a good sort of outline for the book.
Okay.
And it'll kind of give me, and maybe it's people's reactions to it, and I'll see what works and what doesn't, and see what people have to say about that. So, yeah, that's
Okay. And
sort
May 16th, Ohio Bigfoot Conference, Salt Fork State Park. David will be speaking. Do you have a name for this presentation? Are you allowed to even say that?
Mark has not told me I couldn't, but it's Bigfoot and its similars, manifestations of a mystery.
Nice. Oh, I love that. That's fantastic.
Those academic titles have to work hard, they tell you.
Yeah.
One other cool
No.
thing, we're actually in the process of adopting a little girl from China, and so we are going to China probably in June for about 2 weeks, and I don't know if I'll be able to, but I want to try so hard to yare into people.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be great.
It would be.
Over there. And have you heard anything about the Aaron Valley? So who knows? We'll see what this American
That's awesome.
can do over there. We'll see.
Solve the mystery. All right,
Yeah.
David, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you
And
so
we'll
much.
definitely, we'll have you on again real soon, hopefully.
Great.